Hi everyone, this is Christina Barr and you're watching Black Tea News. Hello everyone, it's an honor to be before you today to talk about the former president, Donald Trump. Recently he put out a statement stating like, hey, guess what? I was right about a lot of things, and we saw the media push back on a couple things that he had said in the past year or so, and, you know, they acted like he was crazy, like he was wrong, and now that he's being proven right on some things, they're like, oh, well, maybe we should have listened to him a little bit, but he didn't have any credibility. And I'm like, maybe he didn't have credibility because you were going around saying things like he said, go drink bleach. Like, I don't know, maybe it's things like that, guys. You're really, really dishonest about that. So we're going to go through some of his statements that he made about hydroxychloroquine, the Wuhan lab, Hunter Biden's laptop, and so on. So we're going to talk about those things a little bit. But before I jump into it, I would like to give a shout out to our sponsors today, Brighter Michigan PAC. They have, I'm at their studio right now. So, I'm grateful to be here in the facilities. There's a lot of great people who work for the PAC. They just really, want to help good people get into the job as far as like really representing the people like in the government. And they do a lot of other great things, raising money for veterans and so on. So, they're really good peoples. And if you're triggered by things that I say, I don't work for them. I just I just appreciate them, so you can't get me fired. So I'm going to keep saying what I'm going to say. But I do appreciate these guys, and I'm grateful to be in the studio here today. So let's get to the president, the former President Trump. And so the things that he says that he was correct about. He said, have you noticed that they are now admitting that I was right about everything they lied about before the election? That's a little exaggeration because people aren't admitting that he's right on some things. Even things that they know that he's right about, they won't even admit that he's right. Like I said earlier, they're just like, oh, well, maybe we should have listened a little bit. But he didn't have any credibility. So they justify not listening to him, but they won't come out right and say that he was correct on these things. But some examples that he listed: hydrochloroquine works. The virus came from a Chinese lab. Hunter Biden's laptop was real. The Lafayette Square was not cleared for a photo op. The Russian bounty story was fake. We did produce vaccines before the end of 2020 in record time. Blue state lockdowns didn't work. Schools should be opened. Critical race theory is a disaster for our schools and our country. And our southern border security program was unprecedentedly successful. So I think some of those things, obviously the left will push back on, but I think for the most part, those things are correct. And you got to give credit where credit is due with the president. He did a good job, but the media, they're just an extension of the Democrat Party, and they really ran some hardcore propaganda when it came to the president and his administration. And at the end of the day, the Democrats can't run on policies, and they had to make a villain to say that, well, no matter what could happen, it can't get any worse than this guy. I'm like, well, we had record low unemployment, we didn't start any new wars, and gas prices were significantly lower, though now that I've said that, I'm sure I'll get dinged with a fact check, context missing on Facebook. We had it way better before, and now we're seeing some things that we enjoyed kind of slip, and, you know, I think I pumped gas for like $3.39 the other day, and I remember when it was under $2. I remember when it was really close to $1, actually, but it is what it is. People have made their decisions. I even did an article really fresh after the election about Biden regret from voters, and that actually did pretty darn well on my website if you want to go to blacktnews.com. But do please visit blacktnews.com, check out the content that I have there, the articles that I've written. You can find out where I'm on other platforms, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitter. And if you would like to support, you can also support on blacktnews.com/donate. There are also other ways to do that, which are scrolling there at the bottom. If you would like to support, I ask that you do that, and you can do that through Cash App, PayPal. You can go directly to the website, or you can go ahead and visit the store. You can get one of these nifty t-shirts, Denounce White Supremacy, Defeat Joe Biden. You can get this I'm Not the Victim You're Looking For shirt. Or how about this one? I voted for President Trump, and all I got was historic peace deals like low gas, tax cuts, no new wars, etc., and this lousy t-shirt. Make sure that you trigger a leftist today. So let's go ahead and jump into the content of the day. So Trump said, have you noticed that I was right? So the first thing he listed was the hydrochloroquine works. And are there other means and methods to the COVID that work better that he used himself when he had it, and other people have used, like remdesivir? And so, yeah, there's other methods. But the hydroxychloroquine, I think was always in the cards, and that it worked, that it worked well. And now there's more, articles coming out about it, the success of it, and so on, that people are more willing to admit it now. But when Trump first started touting the drug, Bloomberg came out with an article that said, drug that president touts could kill you in 2 grams. And you would only write a headline like that to freak out people, right? What's their purpose? I don't know, because with most drugs, or all drugs, I guess, if you overindulge, if you overdose, you're more than likely going to die or need your stomach pumped or just something. That's just how things work, especially like with drugs. So yes, if you overdose on a drug, it's likely that you will die. If you inject a lethal dose, you will die. But why put out an article headline like that? Because you're trying to instill fear and delegitimize the president's credibility. And like the media keeps talking about, well, Trump doesn't have any credibility. Well, because you decided to blow it time and time again for whatever reason, but you did it. So let's go on. And talking about this, there was a Democrat in Michigan who she had COVID, and so she decided to take it because she heard Trump talking about it, and she took the drug, and she touts that is the reason why she's alive. So she actually got censured by the Democrats. Like, they were upset that she came out in support of the president because she took this drug. They basically said, we're going to punish you for living and telling people about it. People were so upset about this drug that obviously helped people. I know people who personally took it and swears that their life was saved by it. Thank you for people tuning in. I see your comments. God bless you guys tuning in, and people who watch this afterwards. I know people will watch and tune in after they get off work and when they're sitting down for dinner and so on. I thank everyone who decides to sit down and have a conversation with me. So thank you guys. But I think it was always pretty clear that the drug helped people. Like I said, I know people who personally just swear by it. But the craziest thing about it? There was an episode of Dead Zone that came out in 2003 it was like a plague episode. And so if you watch it, it's basically like they predicted the future, which is funny considering the content of the show. It was about a man who could see the future. He had a near-death experience, and he was in a coma for a long time, I believe. And then he started seeing visions of the future. And so there was an episode where there was a plague going around, and they were trying to figure it out, and it was like a COVID-type virus. So I'm going to play a clip, that's a collage of like the episode. It just goes through really quickly. But if you haven't seen it, there's a lot of like parallels that are really eerie to what happened last year.
We know it acts like a virus. It causes high fever and respiratory distress. Tracking and treating a mysterious outbreak like this would take the CDC months.
We better get started then. For anyone who hasn't been exposed already needs to wear a mask.
China. Isn't that where flu viruses come from?
Yeah. A lot of viruses come from there.
International flight to China?
That's no coincidence. Whatever it is, it originated in China.
Time is not on our side.
It's like looking for a needle in a needle stack.
We have ruled out all the usual suspects: influenza, SARS, bacterial pneumonia.
How long is it going to take?
Well, it took 34 days to isolate the coronavirus that caused SARS, and that's fast.
I'm authorizing a quarantine on everyone who's come in contact with a symptomatic person.
There's got to be something I can do.
On the enzyme, this virus when they were
So the chloroquine did this. So the chloroquine.
This is it. This is your virus.
I'm sorry, but there's no cure for that. Chloroquine, that's an anti-malarial drug.
No. Listen, it suppresses the enzymes. Welcome back, you damn fool. What happened?
We started everyone on chloroquine, stopped the thing dead in its tracks. Now, the CDC would have figured it out eventually, but not in time.
Yeah, someone just commented said that's eerie. Yeah, it's eerie. So no, they didn't like predict the future, but this information was out there that the writers just did a really good job researching the content that they could write something like this. So the fact that this information was so available and they acted like that's not a thing. I'm like, no, you knew it was a thing so much that in 2003 they wrote like the future in an episode of The Dead Zone. So, like I said, it is eerie, but it's eerie that played and it was so accurate, but it's even like more bone chilling that these people pretended like it wasn't a thing. Like, and then they pretended like hydroxychloroquine was so dangerous. When people do take it for malaria, I believe my sister and my dad had to take it while they were in Nigeria because they caught malaria. And so they took that drug. But then they were saying that it's really dangerous. It could impact your heart, which all drugs basically have side effects, right? And so they were acting like, oh, Trump's touting this drug. It's really, really dangerous. You could do all this kind of damage for you. But at the same time, they were saying, well, lupus patients need it, so don't take up all the drugs. It's like, so what? Like, are we weighing the pros and cons? Are you saying we got to save this drug so they can kill the lupus patients? Like, what? Where is the disconnect here? But you just really wanted people not to be safe from this virus, to have some kind of medication that can really help them. I mean, in Michigan, like they slowed down people being able to access it, and the law, the licensing agency, like they were kind of going after doctors for prescribing it or over prescribing it or whatever. But like I said, I know people who swear their lives were saved because they took this drug, and they're glad that the president talked about it and that they took it upon themselves. Like I said, there was a Democrat who like thanked Trump and was glad he said something, and she took it and she was better, and the Democrats were mad and they punished her for living and surviving and talking about it. So studies came out after the fact that it was effective. I'm not saying it's the most effective thing, and vaccine still came and people were taking the vaccine, and people are glad to take it and happy to get back to life with that. And this drug wasn't a vaccine, but it was still helping people at the time, and it was good. And there's still like a very high survival rate. Like some people get it, especially young people. Don't. I knew somebody who had it, and they just told him to go home. They didn't, tell him to take orange juice or NyQuil, nothing like that. Not that stuff would help, but my point is that they just like go home and let it pass. So it is the plague, and super deadly for a lot of people. I mean, I had personal family that it hit very hard, but they really, 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 really wanted to just extend the panic so they could just obtain more power. And that's just the truth. That's what we've seen. So let's move on to the virus itself. So where it came from. The president said that it came from a lab in China. And the media was so upset. They were pretending that wasn't a thing and like it was a conspiracy. And they were pushing that it came from a bat in the wet labs and so on, like it was natural, which is really kind of crazy when you think about, like, if it's looking like the lab thing is the most legit thing. I mean, even like in the Fauci emails, he was discussing things with like another doctor, and they were just kind of saying like looking and analyzing it. And I heard this early on. People were saying this too. If you look at how it's just kind of how the structure of the virus itself, it doesn't look like it could occur in nature itself. So, but people were banning these wet markets, looking all these people sideways for eating bats and talking about it. So, if you're talking about perpetuating harmful stereotypes, people were mad at Trump, and but you had people mad at these people for eating bats in wet markets and stuff. So, when the truth is that there was a lab, or allegedly the alleged truth, I guess right now, but there was a lab where they were studying this stuff, and there's people into gain of function research that are into making viruses more deadly so they can try to predict how to solve them, so they can just kind of go out their way to stop a pandemic before it spreads. But it's not actually unlikely that these things get released into the wild. That is not actually, unfortunately, it's not a super rare occurrence, so they should have at least known that it was a possibility. The Hill put out which it was talking about it, and there was like a huge article that came out, just pages long, kind of detailing the gain of function research and the likelihood that it probably came from a lab, and also how people in the science community were going after scientists, bullying them, threatening them, intimidating them for speaking out on the truth about these issues. It's just really crazy. So I'm going to go back and play the president's words, and then go into how they tried to do an investigation in the Biden administration. When they came in, they decided to kind of end some of the investigation that the Trump team was looking into. But before I play that, I just want to say, go ahead and share this broadcast. I appreciate you guys watching it. You can go ahead and invite people, share it, click it and send it in their inboxes and so on, post it on your page, get other people involved. And if they can't watch now, they can come watch later. But this is important stuff to talk about. I know a lot of people feel like Trump is gone. What's the point of all this stuff? And feel like he's not going to come back. There's a lot of people who expect him to come back and run in 2024. I'm not like sold on that's going to happen. A lot's going to depend on how he feels by then. I mean, he'll be the age that Biden is. I think he'll be more cognitive than Biden is at that particular age, but just a lot can happen in the world of politics. So there's a good chance he might not come back and even be the president. But it's important to unveil this media bias and unveil how these politicians took advantage of all these things to just uproot our lives and gain more power and gain control. So this is the president's words way back in the day.
You said a moment ago you will soon have information on where this virus originated. The Director of National Intelligence today put out a statement saying that they believe it was naturally occurring, it was not man-made. But
who is that? Who is that said that?
The Office of the Director of National
Intelligence.
Intelligence.
Who in particular? Who was the man that made that statement?
It was a statement that the ODNI...
Oh, he would know that, National Intelligence. So we'll see.
That would be your Director of National Intelligence.
I think it's... I mean, you'd have to tell me who specifically, who made the statement.
The statement was just put out under the Office of the ODNI.
We'll see. I mean, I have to see the statement. I just haven't seen it.
But the question I had was, have you seen anything at this point?
Because we're looking at that, John, separately from...
But
we're looking at exactly where it came from, who it came from, how it happened, separately and also scientifically. So we're going to be able to find out.
And my question is, have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
Are you suggesting that maybe you have some evidence that this was not a naturally occurring virus?
We're going to see what it is. You're talking about the virus and where it came from?
Yeah.
No, we're going to see where it is. We're going to see where it comes from. And, look, you know every theory. You had the theory from the lab, you had the theory from many different, the bats, the type of bat, and the bat is 40 miles away, so it couldn't have been here, and it couldn't have been there. And, there's a lot of theories, but yeah, we have people looking at it very, very strongly.
Okay, so granted, Trump isn't always the most articulate with the technical things, but they were looking at different things. He's hearing things from people all the time. he has a task force. He's hearing different information that all these people haven't heard, but there's a lot of analysts and commentators now coming out and saying things like, oh, you know, it sounded like just Trump conspiracy stuff, or he just doesn't have a legitimate opinion because he doesn't have the credibility, when they've spent so much time burning through his credibility. Like, they're the people who said, he said drink bleach. Didn't happen. Like, they're the people who made it seem like the president of the free world, like of the most powerful nation in the world, was afraid of stairs. That was a thing. Like, CNN ran stories, like analysts talking, you know, they saw his handshake and they had medical experts like, what's wrong with Trump? Trying to allege all these like silly stories. I mean, they're mad because he fed a koi fish wrong. You know, and there's other stories we're going to get to where they just try to blow his credibility. But there's so many petty things that they did to just make him seem like a nonsense person. So, yes, they had people looking into it, and they had an investigation going. When Biden got in, they decided to cut some of that stuff out.
White House correspondent Kevin Corke is tracking all the latest developments for us tonight. Good evening, Kevin.
Good evening, Shannon. Better late than never. That seems to be the prevailing refrain from critics who accuse the Biden administration of more or less slow-walking rigorous investigations into the origins of COVID-19 and the possible involvement of the Wuhan lab in China that may, repeat, may have been its starting point. And to that end, tonight we learned that the Biden administration went so far as to shut down a Trump administration State Department investigation into the same.
The president believes there needs to be an independent investigation, one that's run by the international community.
Even as the Biden administration continues its call for a fuller WHO-led investigation into the origins of COVID-19, new reports have surfaced that Biden's team shut down a closely held State Department effort launched late in the Trump administration to prove the virus originated in a Chinese lab. The existence of the State Department inquiry and its termination this spring by the Biden administration comes to light amid growing questions about whether the virus leaked out of a Wuhan lab with links to the Chinese military. A State Department spokesperson tells CNN tonight, even though this discrete project has concluded, the State Department continues to work with the interagency to look into the COVID origins issue.
Because we don't know 100% what the origin is, it's imperative that we look and we do an investigation. And that's how we feel right now.
Fauci's testimony comes after a report in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend that bolstered the theory that the virus was lab-created and didn't occur, as Fauci has repeatedly suggested, in nature. Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn is calling on the White House to ensure a thorough and unbiased investigation into the origin of COVID-19. The American people deserve to know how President Biden is working to keep Communist China's influence out of the World Health Organization investigation into the origin of COVID-19, she wrote, adding, President Biden's fear of a confrontation with Xi Jinping is cause for concern. The families of nearly 600,000 Americans killed by this virus deserve answers.
So Trump was looking into it. Biden came in. They started like tampering down this investigation, called that closed from what they were doing there. And then in Jen Psaki and Biden, they're like, well, we're going to let the international community investigate this. We're going to have WHO investigate this. And WHO is in the pocket of the Chinese. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but this happened pretty early on with the pandemic. But there was this question from a Taiwan reporter talking about, were they going to let Taiwan into the WHO, and they pretended like they didn't hear the question. And I'm going to play this because it's really, really remarkable.
Would the WHO consider Taiwan's membership? Hello?
I'm sorry, I can't hear. I couldn't hear your question.
Okay, yeah. Let me repeat the question.
No, that's okay. Let's move to another one then.
Right, because I'm actually curious on talking about Taiwan as well, on Taiwan's case.
We decided to give Dr. Alward another call to follow up.
And I just want to see if you can comment a bit on how Taiwan has done so far in terms of containing the virus.
Well, Well, we've already talked about China, and when you look across all the different areas of China, they've actually all done quite a good job. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for inviting us to participate, and good luck as you go forward with the battle in Hong Kong.
Yeah, so he would not acknowledge that Taiwan was a thing, and when she pressed him, they just dropped out of the call, and first he's pretend like he didn't hear the question, and so she was like, well, I'll repeat it, and he's like, that's good, we can just move on. And then she just tried to like kind of repeat it, and he just dropped out, and then she said something about Taiwan, and he's like, well, China, like just pretending it's not a thing. You cannot trust the WHO to thoroughly look into this investigation to determine if this came from the Wuhan lab in China, because they're in their pocket. You just cannot trust them, at least not on their own. The White House needs to take this serious and look into it. And I don't know all the reasons. I'm sure there's lobbyist money, whatever kind of bureaucracy kind of reasons why they don't want to get to the middle, to the real center of this and find out the true origin and all. But people deserve answers. People, it's interesting when people talk about the coronavirus, and they were so angry at Trump, and at the time they'd say like, well, 300,000 people died or 200,000 people died because of Trump, and they would lay it all on Trump. And you know what I started telling people? I started saying, like, if you say that number, you're like standing on the graves of these people just to prove a political point, to dunk on someone. Because if you truly cared about accountability, how come we're not talking about Gretchen Whitmer in nursing homes, or Andrew Cuomo in nursing homes, and all, Newsom, and all these bad policies that people had that led to our most vulnerable people, our population, our elderly, being, put in danger, their lives at risk. So if you want to talk about people who died, then how come you're not holding people accountable? Why do you want to put everything on Trump? And I understand he's a president. You want to blame everything on him. He sits at the head or whatever. But that's not how our system works. We all have states, and our states have governors, and they can control what happens. You can only do so much on a federal level. So when people want to blame everything on Trump without looking at the nastiness and the ugliness within their own party, and people just like excuse, like Cuomo, for example. People were saying they were Cuomo-sexual. They were so in love with this man. He got an Emmy. They're tuning in every day, even though he was so rude to people, especially if they wanted to know how they could work. And he's like, well, go get an essential job. You won't be an essential worker. You won't kill people that way. That's not how science works, sir. That's not how science works. But they would say silly things like that, and they would uplift this man because he was on their team, and they wanted to uplift him and trash Trump. And Trump could be the only villain in the entire story for the entire year. That's who it had to be. So after Trump was gone, they could start talking about the nursing home and the covering those things up. And the right-wing media had been talking about it the whole time, and the left-wing people didn't start talking about it until way after the election. And then they started talking about it once it started kind of eking through mainstream media a bit, and then it became like a big thing. But then they didn't even really want to get him to ding him that far on that, and the stories about sexual assault started coming up, and or uncomfortable touching or whatever, and I don't say whatever to trivialize or anything, but those stories came out, and the Democrats probably wanted him to fall on his sword, but he knows how it works. He knows these people, and he was just like, I'm not stepping down. He probably feels like they're as corrupt as he is, and was probably like, I'm not falling my sword for you people. No, they'll have to vote me out. So, but really, he should go down for the nursing home thing, and we should be looking in there. We should be looking in my state of Michigan, but unfortunately, our attorney general is also corrupt. So, it's a vicious cycle here in Michigan. So. Let's go on. We know that the WHO should not be the only people handling this investigation and looking into it thoroughly, or having the lead. And who knows, they could surprise us, but I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening. So the next thing the president talked about on his list was Hunter Biden's laptop was real, which, by the way, I don't think there was any real dispute about that from the Biden team. They when they were pressed on it, like TJ Ducklow, when he was still in the Biden administration, he worked for them in the press, like during the campaign, and it started. But then a story came out that he basically harassed another reporter. So they let him go eventually. No, I think he stepped down himself. Like they put him on like a little bit of suspension, then I think he stepped down because that was another like Biden's not taking accountability story like he said he would. But anyway, he was in an interview, and other people were interviews, and they would not like say that, like, we're not saying these things aren't real. They kind of do a runaround sometimes, but they wouldn't flat out deny that the emails were real, that the laptop was real. And so that should have like sent off alarm bells with the media that obviously these things were real, but they didn't want to, go with the story. Like NPR was like, we're not talking about it because we're not like going to talk about like silly things that are fake news. Of course, NPR and other people had to walk that back, but the most egregious thing that happened was what the social media companies did to the New York Post, who broke the story, and they were like, well, we don't know if it's true, and they're like, and this stuff was from leaked and hacked material is what they said, and it wasn't from a hack. It was a very bizarre story with Hunter Biden leaving his laptop somewhere with so much incriminating stuff on it. But these things start to make more sense once you remember he's a crackhead, guys. It just does. So they had all this information, and then they start, not just the emails that people weren't denying was the thing. Then the pictures with him smoking like the crack and with the I think it was crack. I mean, well, the crack pipe was one, and he had crack pipe in his mouth, and there's other stuff. People, I mean, obviously they had his laptop, and the media just ignored it like through the whole election. And then people would say, well, he's not running for president. Why does the story matter? If the story didn't matter, you wouldn't have suppressed the story. And I know Don Jr. was just like spinning. Because he's just like, if this was me, this would be an incredible story nonstop. That about Don Jr. If he was Hunter Biden, these stories would be all over the place. They wouldn't be able to shut up about it. But when it comes to Hunter, they ignored that stuff. They ignored the 10% or whatever the cut was for the big guy. They ignored all those things, the different emails, and the drug things are just kind of like drama. Is kind of inconsequential. The only thing that I think is really weird about his drug use and stuff. Well, one, he did lie on a gun form because he was clearly on drugs when he filled out a form and said that he wasn't like addicted to any substance. So he should be charged and fined if you want to talk about gun control. Like, go take care of Hunter. And people like Hunter who would lie on their gun forms. But I also find it strange that he had such a problem for such a long time, even back when Biden was in the Senate and so on, and they were doing the tough stuff with the war on drugs, and he had people in his life that were close that had those issues that he could have related to people about, but they just took the very hard stance. And I'm not saying that was even the wrong thing, because you talk to people who are like, I don't know, in their 40s or something, 40s, they'll talk about how people lost a generation and they were locked up and so on. If you talk to people who are maybe like late 50s, early mid-60s or something, like people in my parents' generation who lived like the inner cities and stuff, they'll be like, man, that crime was terrible. And something needed to be done. So people have different perspectives on the war on drugs, but I do find it interesting that Biden went so hardcore when, like I said, he had someone who was afflicted with these issues for such a long time. But people like him just cover it and then they go after your kids. That's what they do, and that's what he did. That's what they did. So the Hunter Biden laptop thing, one night Squirtle, like the Pokemon was trending, and so many people were like, oh, why is Squirtle, my favorite Pokemon, trending? And they go and they look it up and like, oh dear God, because this is like, he was like boinking some prostitutes and, or I don't know if they were prostitutes, but he was like, he liked to make his own sex films, and there was a Squirtle like in the background just kind of looking like, bruh, like it was really bizarre. Very strange. But the laptop, always obviously real. And the media knew that, but they just pretended otherwise. And people who had access to it volunteered and said, I will show you the laptop to prove it's real. You can see what's on the contents, and people didn't want to. And it was really crazy that Twitter and Facebook decided to shut down like the sharing of it. And like with New York Post being like blocked out, or I mean, it's the oldest paper in the nation, and their story was true. Their story was totally true, but they played political games, and Trump was right about it being real. Here's another big story: the Lafayette Square was not cleared for a photo op. If you recall last year, when they had the BLM riots, that there was a church that was set on fire and stuff the night before, and so people were out, and people were saying that Trump cleared it for a photo op. So that was the optics, and that was what people kept saying, and even people on the right were really mad, and I had to argue with people like, oh, he went there and he used the Bible as a prop and so on, and I got into it with some people like trying to, like, imagery is important, especially like when you're president. Like, this historical church was lit on fire by rioters. He went there, held up a Bible, and was like, we're going to make America great again. And he didn't say like Democrats suck or something. He didn't say anything like that. He didn't say anything controversial at all. He just held up a Bible and was like, we're going to make America great again, and then went on his way. But it wasn't, and that was a photo op, but he didn't have it cleared for the photo op. And so now there's been investigations into that, things I don't know why you couldn't have known back then, but they're admitting it now. So I'm going to go ahead and play a clip.
And we're following breaking news at this hour. The Inspector General has just released a report about the controversial clearing of Washington, D.C.'s Lafayette Square Park just last summer. Now, you may recall when that happened back on June 1st of last year. And after the park was cleared, President Trump then held a photo op where he was seen holding a Bible. If you remember the footage you're seeing right there on your screen. NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delaney joins us now. Ken, what exactly does this report tell us?
Morgan, this is a pretty shocking finding by the independent Inspector General of the Interior Department. It really turns on its head what we thought we knew about what happened here, which is it finds essentially that the decision by the park police to clear that park of protesters had nothing whatsoever to do with Donald Trump's desire to have a photo op or to walk through that park. And that in fact it was made hours before that they wanted to install some anti-scale fencing because they were concerned that the protests were growing ever more violent, that they made that decision independent of the White House or of Attorney General William Barr. Now, it does find that after they started clearing the park, Barr walked down there and spoke to the commander of the park police and said, hey, the president is coming down. And that was the first time that commander knew that Trump was going to make an appearance. And according to this report, his response was, are you freaking kidding me? So he was surprised. But that does show that at least Barr tried to speed things up, and people can make their own conclusion about whether that was appropriate.
Yeah. So that was all nonsense. And they're like, oh, we're really surprised. Turns out, like, no, you'd have to be stupid, literally stupid, to have thought that was a thing, I think. Anyway. It was just ludicrous. It was ludicrous. The sort of propaganda the left had, the media had, the Democrats had surrounding this, making it such a huge thing. Like, a peaceful protest is one thing, but a lot of these people weren't, especially like very early on when a lot of this stuff was popping off. Like, there was an incident like that, I believe it was that night before, that Trump was, like, in a bunker, and people were tweeting out, like, bunker boy to mock the president. And so people were saying stuff like, oh, he had to do the show of force to show he's not, and just coming up with all these sort of crazy theories to project their, their ideology, their own perceptions onto Trump. And it's like, it wasn't even based in reality. It's just based on what the media formed in their minds about him. It was like the Jussie Smollett thing. Like, that story was always beyond unbelievable. It only, like, I'm sorry if you believed it, but it was so foolish to think that in the middle of a polar vortex in Chicago that some guys in MAGA hats attacked Jussie Smollett while he was on his way to Subway. That was always a ridiculous story. It was, but Kamala Harris and all these people tweeted out like, "Oh my gosh, this racism that's perpetuated in the country," and they only exacerbate these things so much because they wanted to tie it to Trump. They want America to be evil, so evil and racist and so on. And then Trump is the face. Trump was like the face, and then Biden had to come in and slay the monster. I don't know why this racist white man had to come in and be the soul of the nation, but I guess that says a lot about where we think the soul of the nation is right now. So, they wanted to believe this story. They wanted to believe that story, and it was always silly. It was always absurd, and Trump was right. And of course, you can be right when you were just telling the truth the whole entire time. Here's another important story. The Russian bounty story was fake. Trump said it was fake. His people said it was fake. The Democrats didn't believe them. The media didn't believe them. They kept harping on it. Intelligence agencies were saying things like, no, there's not enough details here. So the story was that Russians were paying bounties for our troops to be attacked. And they were saying like, no, that's not a thing. That's a rumor, but the intelligence didn't pan out. And they were saying that they didn't take up the story to Trump because it didn't meet any sort of credibility. And so people were saying, no, Trump knew about it, and this is credible, and this happened, and Trump is letting Putin come in and kill our soldiers. Well, turns out that wasn't a thing. So I'm going to play a clip from Jen Psaki. Sorry if it makes her ears bleed.
It reports that Russia encouraged Taliban attacks against U.S. and coalition personnel in Afghanistan. The word report seems to leave some ambiguity. Does the White House believe Russia placed bounties on American troops?
Well, I would say first that we felt the reports were enough of a cause of concern that we wanted our intelligence community to look into those reports as a part of this overall assessment. They assessed with low to moderate confidence, as you alluded to, that Russian intelligence officers sought to encourage Taliban attacks against U.S. and coalition personnel in Afghanistan. The reason that they have low to moderate confidence in this judgment is in part because it relies on detainee reporting, and due to the challenging environment, and also due to the challenging operating environment in Afghanistan. So it's challenging to gather this intelligence and this data. I will say that we assess, our intelligence community, assesses that a General Staff Main Intelligence Directorate, GRU, also known as, manage interaction with individuals in Afghan criminal networks. We have high confidence in that assessment, and the involvement of this GRU's unit is consistent with Russia's encouraging attacks against U.S. and coalition personnel in Afghanistan. So while there's low to moderate assessment of these reports, we felt it was important for our intelligence community to look into it, and we of course will not stand by and accept the targeting of our personnel by any elements, including a foreign state actor. This information really puts the burden on Russia and the Russian government to explain their engagement here. Go ahead.
Jen, given that assessment, does the president have any regrets for how many times he attacked President Trump on the campaign about this issue for not taking action related to the Russian bounties?
Well, I'm not going to speak to the previous administration, but I will say that we had enough concern about these reports and about the targeting of our men and women serving, the men and women who are proudly serving around the world, that we wanted our intelligence community to look into it.
So they say, hey, given that basically you found out exactly what the Trump campaign was saying, not the Trump campaign, but the Trump White House, that they were saying, there's no there. Does Biden have any apologies for basically, going out there claiming that he's a Russian puppet and, and is allowing our troops? He's a commander-in-chief. And Biden is going out there accusing the commander-in-chief of knowing that our troops are in danger, that the Russians are putting out bounties, and that the Taliban is going in and killing them. Any regrets there? And she's just dodges it. And it's interesting that when someone asks something about Trump or something, she'll say oh, the former administration, we're going to talk about the former administration, or they act like he's Voldemort or something, you can't say his name. But you don't owe him any apology. You owe America an apology that you would go around telling these lies about Trump to undermine his credibility And I get that. You're running for president. You want to attack the guy because you want to beat him and you want to win, right? That's your thing. That's your MO. I totally understand that. However, you know that you were the vice president before. You worked with the president. You were number 2 in case something happens. Oh, heaven help us. I guess heaven help us now. He's the president. But you know how important that seat is, and you know what you wanted to do. These people said that Trump couldn't be president because he didn't respect the office, and someone who is an adult needed to come back in who respected the office and would handle it respectfully. Yet he went around accusing the commander-in-chief of being someone who didn't care about our troops being killed and targeted by the Taliban under orders of the Russians. That we can't. It's amazing that we let him get away with that, and get away with that as in now he's the president. And it's amazing that the media and all these people are letting him get away with it. We cannot let this stand when the midterms come around, and then in 2024, obviously. But he's not going to run again. It's just like there's no justice in the world, and Trump can't even get an apology. But he was right. This story was fake, and the media who pretended like it was a real thing, they should be the ones with no credibility. So that's another one Trump was right about. Now, the other one, we did produce vaccines before the end of 2020 in record time. Obviously, that happened. People were saying, oh, Trump's just saying that again. He keeps saying there's going to be vaccines. Even like the final debate, like you said there's going to be vaccines, but you said that before, but now we don't have anything, trying to just pretend like nothing's there. But who knows if these companies kind of even held back on some stuff before until the election. I don't know, because it was really suspicious that when Trump had his challenges and stuff, and when it was kind of obvious, I think it was when the Supreme Court was like, we're not going to hear this case or something, when Pfizer, a Michigan company, was like, oh, by the way, we have this vaccine and it's like 94% effective. So if you're at 94 like right now, then you knew that how close you were, right? And I doubt our governor probably didn't know about that. Maybe she didn't. I doubt it. But as soon as it was clear that Trump wasn't going to be able to overturn any results, people probably already suspected that anywhere. But when it was like pretty clear to the public at that point, that's when they start making their announcements. And then they did, and then Johnson and other people just kind of started flooding in, making their announcements about the vaccine that they had. Because they wanted to push doom and gloom, like there's no optimism with Trump, even though Biden was like talking about the dark winter and so on. But people didn't believe it. Like Naomi Wolf, she's a renowned feminist, and she voted for Biden, but when she saw that they were still talking about lockdowns and masks and all this other kind of stuff, she's like, wait a second, if I had known, I wouldn't have voted for Biden. It's like, what world were you living in? What were you paying attention to? So we know that Trump was right about that, obviously. Blue state lockdowns didn't work. I think that's kind of a more controversial, I think he's right, but I think that's sort of a more controversial opinion that people aren't just going to jump on and say, yeah, you were right about that. But for example, Michigan had quite a flare-up, and we had some very strict and stupid lockdown measures, while other people are free. And our governor flew the coop to Florida and other places where they had freedom. And so on. So I think he's got a case there, but that one's going to be, the other ones are just kind of indisputable, I think. But that one, the left isn't going to just claim that he was right on that. Schools should have been open. Yeah, schools definitely should have been open. They were teachers unions were partnering with CDC and other people to just kind of keep it closed. The Biden administration CDC, basically, admitted that they consulted teachers unions and stuff when making these decisions and recommendations. So schools should have definitely been open. And I've talked about this on my broadcast before about the sort of damage that I think we've done to our kids. And that is something I'm sure I'll continue to talk about. But we really did, Parents are supposed to be brave for their kids and sacrifice themselves if necessary. And we did it in reverse, basically. We were willing to kind of sacrifice our kids. And kids are resilient, and hope we'll never know how much, not never, but we don't know how much it has affected them. But I've heard some pretty brutal stories that I don't have time to get into today about what we've done. But kids should have been in school. But on a side note, a lot of parents, because they've been doing the curriculum or seeing the stuff or seeing the Zoom meetings and whatever with the kids, they are a little bit more aware of some of the stuff that they have been teaching their kids. And so now the next thing that Trump said he was right about is critical race theory is a disaster for our schools and our country. So that's another thing that's kind of controversial right now, at least with the left pushing back on it. But it's pretty obvious. I talked about this the day before, and maybe even the day before, I can't recall, but about how awful critical race theory is. It is not just teaching history. It gets into a lot of how society functions, but basically white people are bad. They are oppressors. Minorities are oppressed. If you can't succeed in life, that's because you've been oppressed, and they have an excuse for everything, and it goes deeper than that. And guys, it is really, really, really easy to look up critical race theory, the roots of it, and to see that it's tied to critical theory, which critical theory is a Marxist ideology. It's just really easy to look up. I'm not going to go into all the stuff today, but I agree with the president. I think he's right on it. It is a disaster. I'm reading this book, Color, Communism, Common Sense, that it's like almost like prophetic to like what's going on today with a black man who used to be in the Communist Party, just talking about how they would recruit black people, and they would bring up legitimate grievances, like legitimate things, like obviously more legitimate back then in like in the 30s versus like today, but they would lure them in. But racism wasn't like that was what they lured them in, talking about sort of injustice in the world. But the true threat of everything is like capitalism and American imperialism. Like that's what they really hated. And so they'd have these white handlers who would always kind of be spying on them at the end of the day, because they needed to make sure that what you wanted to do for the black community or what you thought might help it would never surpass or be more important than actually promoting communism. So it's just a really fascinating look. But it's when you think about that and what he's talking about, it's interesting when you consider a lot of these black activists, like Patrisse Cullors and the other like Black Lives Matter founders, are Marxists, and a lot of these top like academics that are activists who are black are also communist or Marxists. And it's just a really fascinating pattern that I'll have to address at a later time, but I'm trying to wrap this up. And the last thing that the president mentioned that he was right about was that our southern border security program was unprecedentedly successful. And I don't know about like historically for all time or anything like that, but they did a much better job and had a handle on things that way better than Biden did. And so they really pulled people's heartstrings so crazy with like when they started showing the pictures of the kids in cages, and the pictures that they were showing were from the Biden-Obama era. So that's what's just so crazy, that they got Biden back in the office, and Trump would say, "Who built the cages?" And he would say that on a debate stage, and like people didn't listen, like, and he would even, and like the story came out conveniently right before the last debate, right? And they're like, well, there's these kids who still haven't been united with their families. And they're like, how dare Trump administration do this, separate them? And he's just like, there's people who came with coyotes. And then there's leftists. One person was an elected official down south in a southern state somewhere, black Democrat, and she tweeted out like, coyote? How's a coyote going to carry a child across the border? And so I've posted that and other tweets like similar on my Facebook. It was just unbelievable, and I've shown them on like broadcasts. People like they were so invested, or claimed to be invested. They were emotionally invested, but they let people take advantage of them because they didn't even do the research enough to know what a coyote is. And it's okay if you don't know what a coyote is, but if you're going to be so gung-ho that you're going to make this like the number one reason that you're not going to vote for Trump, or it was like, I don't know, 50% of the reason or whatever it was, then you at least need to do enough research to know what a coyote is, I think. So the Biden administration, of course, just really mishandled the border. They made it seem like, well, they basically encouraged people to come, or don't discourage it. Now they're trying to change their tune, but it's a little too late. They had overflow capacities. They had so much so that they started moving people. My cousin let us know that in the areas where she was living, they started putting kids in, renting out the hotels and having them in hotels. In Michigan, they are bringing up people here to live here, and they just have them all over the place because they can't handle everyone spilling in from the border. There's people just literally dropping kids off the top of the wall, and they're not protecting the border. People in Texas and other places are just trying to protect it themselves. They had stopped building the wall. Now they've recanted on that. And now they're saying, well, now you can't come. But I will say the very first time I was like super grieved about the stupidity of the Biden administration. Jen Psaki was doing a press interview and a briefing. And so they wanted to know what were they doing to mitigate this, people stopping them from coming. And so she's like, well, I think you guys will like this. So she starts reading a list of things, and she's like, we did these, we took out this radio ad, this radio ad, this radio ad. And then she's like, in this country, we did a cartoon. And I'm just listening to it in horror. She's just so happy, like proud of this. And I'm like, she really thinks we're going to solve the border crisis with cartoon propaganda? No, get these people on the phone and say, hey, if we find your citizens crossing our border, we're going to charge you for it. Like, we're going to take it out of your aid. We're going to, tax the money coming that's being sent back. Just something. Like, play some kind of hardball with these people. But don't, cartoons? Really? Like, that's what you think is going to solve the border crisis? So she seems so proud. And then a reporter asked her, well, do you have any evidence that this is stopping it? And she's like, we'll never know who decides not to come. Okay, so that means you'll never know if this was effective and a waste of money, right? So that was the first time I was like just kind of grieved, like we're run by a team of fools that don't know what they're doing, which is crazy because a lot of these people are just from the Obama administration, so it's not like it's their first rodeo. She did press. She wasn't the main, press secretary, but this was her job. So it's just amazing. It's just really amazing. But the Biden administration was warned by, DHS when they're coming in about their border policies and how it was going to make things worse. So former acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf said the Trump officials warned the incoming Biden administration that dismantling the Trump administration's immigration policies would cause problems at the southern border. So they were warned, they didn't listen, and now they have a major crisis on their hands. It's not solved. They're keeping people from going. The press are pretty much blocked out. They don't want people to talk about it, but it's still not solved. They're reversing some things, like the border wall, and actually, Kamala went, Guatemala, and she's like, don't come, and they're like, boo, you. Trump won. They're pretty disrespectful. It was funny, but yeah. So they're trying to change course, but they're the ones who made this mess, and I don't know how they plan to clean it up other than going maybe harder on the border than what Obama did, and they were calling him the deporter-in-chief. So that's pretty much all I have for you guys today with the list of whether Trump was right or not, and he was for sure right on this list. Whether the Democrats want to acknowledge it or not, whether, the leftists want to acknowledge it, the media want to acknowledge it, which some things they have gone back and tried to acknowledge it a little bit, but they won't give him his due diligence. And riding on this wave of correctness, who knows, the former president might try to go ahead and jump back in the race in 2024, but we shall see. I'm not totally convinced it's going to happen. And frankly, if I were him, he's at home playing golf. And he doesn't really, really believe he lost anyway, so maybe it's not that huge of a sting. And then he gets to just sit back and be like, I was right about this. I was right about this. But he is incredibly petty. So I think that could be the driving factor to coming back and just being like, and then it would be epic, right? It would be like Return of the Jedi. And on May the 4th, Don Jr. had a tweet about that, like 2016 was A New Hope. And 2020 was Empire Strikes Back. And so if Trump comes back and wins in 2024, it'll be, Return of the Jedi. So, so I think there's a little bit of that epic inspiration in there too. Like, he likes a good story. He did reality TV, so he likes a good storytelling. So I don't know for sure what will happen, but one thing's for sure, he's glad to be right, and he will be using that. I'm sure there'll be lots of tapes and montages and things, and he really does, even with all the things in the negative media that's been had and said, he does have a really compelling case to come back to just say, I was right about these things. The media deceived you, Biden deceived you, the Democrats deceived you, but I was right about these things. Are you happy with your gas prices now? Do you like your hotels being like exploding with people you can't get a room because there's kids spilling out in cages, over capacity, that coyotes are dropping them off of walls and so on, that they're being abused in all sorts of ways because of a problem they created? Do you like these things? Do you like losing your high-paying jobs? That you were working on a pipeline, but they don't want Americans to work on pipelines here, but they'll approve things in Russia. They'll help. They want to tax us more here, find a way to even tax you after you leave, and do all these sort of things. Like, I told you this would happen, and here it is. So he has a very compelling comeback case. He just does. He just does. So it'll probably be a stronger campaign than what he ran in 2020, running off of his record, because now you got some contrast, right? So you got some contrast. You get to see, like, oh gosh, we actually did have it good back then. So Trump was right. And he's been right about a lot of things. This is just a list he provided. Like, there's other things he was right on that we could talk about. But I am going to wrap it up. I'm not going to do 5 closings today. Please go to blacktnews.com. Check out content that I have there. Check out articles that I've written, and also check out things that I have in the store. When you do buy things, that does obviously help the broadcast and things that we're doing as we're trying to expand Black Tea. This is a really good one, especially, for the big Trump was right, situation. You voted for all these things, you got them, and you need to display the list of pride. And if you really thought Trump was the GOAT with these other GOATs, you can get this shirt, especially, since Juneteenth's coming up, you might want to, rock Abraham Lincoln on there with your love for Trump right there, who made Juneteenth a national holiday. Trump made people mad when he said he made Juneteenth a thing, which I've celebrated Juneteenth for years because it is like a Republican holiday because, Republicans, they're the ones who are the abolitionists, But the controversy of him talking about it made a lot of people talk about it. So I'm like, I guess he's kind of right. But I always, not always, but the past couple of years, we have been celebrating Juneteenth and having Republican events. But anyway, you can go to the website, pick up those things. If you would like to give, you can do that with the ticker tape down there at the paypal.me/Christina L. Barr, or you can do that Cash App at Ninja Dust Pub, or you can just go to the website and go to blacktnews.com/donate. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.